All right, Casey, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, well then I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar hosted by Handel Information Technologies. My name is Katie Notman, and I work in the Business Development Department here at Handel. I will be moderating today's webinar alongside our presenter, Casey Bader, who is also our Vice President of Business Development. Our session today will be recorded, and you will each receive a copy of it in your inbox tomorrow that you can rewatch or share with anyone who wasn't able to attend today. As for what to expect from today's webinar, Casey will be walking through our first class software implementation process here at Handel. And as a previous project manager himself, Casey has extensive experience and will be able to provide first-hand insight into each step of the process. During the session, please send in any questions you have into the chat or the question box. At the end of the session, a survey will pop up on your screen. We ask for a couple quick minutes of your time to give us any feedback that you have so we can continually improve our webinar experience. And with that, I will hand it over to Casey to get started.
Thank you very much, Katie. Let me get my presentation shown here. Okay. Are you seeing my screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be talking about software implementations and trying to lay out a roadmap for success. We have been involved in hundreds of implementations, have nearly 100 active implementations right now, and have been through this process and saw them be more successful and sometimes less successful. Over the years, we've developed processes that have helped to ensure that all of our projects are successful. And, at the beginning of a project, when the contract is finalized and people are ready to get started, there's a lot of enthusiasm. And what we want to do is harness that enthusiasm and activity and effort and channel it in the right way, outlining responsibilities on both sides to ensure that as we go through the implementation process, we're doing it in the right way and we're affecting a great outcome when you go live. So what I'm going to be talking about today is a little introduction to Handel Information Technologies and RiteTrack for those of you who aren't familiar with us. I'm going to talk about some common myths about IT projects, 7 steps to prepare for your implementation. So those are internal things that you're going to do to get ready to start working with Handel and to develop and deploy your system. Then I'm going to talk about the phases and processes that an implementation will go through. And finally, what happens when you go live, when the implementation is done and RiteTrack goes into a production environment. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you find this webinar informative. And as Katie said, if you have any questions, please enter them into the chat interface and we'll answer those at the end. Handel Information Technologies in October will have been in business for 26 years. As I mentioned, we've had hundreds of system implementations of RiteTrack. We currently are supporting 80 active implementations. I should mention all of our support is internal. We work primarily with tribal, county, and state governments, and both in the social services and judicial services realms. We have standard modules in both of those, and I'll talk about what those are in a slide or two. But those are the kind of umbrellas under which we generally work or implement RiteTrack for. And then in addition to the system and the implementation services that we're going to be talking about, we also provide exceptional support. That doesn't come from us. That's not a marketing ploy. We get that feedback from our customers. And of course, when we're dealing with the types of data that we do in RiteTrack systems, data security is of utmost importance. And so RiteTrack has first-class security as well. Some things about RiteTrack, although we're not actually going to be looking at it today, but it is a customizable platform. So while I mentioned standard modules, you also have the ability to add, edit, and delete from the system, customize it so that our goal is, can we provide a standard system that is 80%, say, of what most programs of a certain type would need, based on best practices and federal reporting requirements, perhaps. And then that final 20% would be customized, and that's where the implementation process comes in. Excuse me, RiteTrack is both web-based and mobile. I'll mention this a few times, not necessarily the differences between them. If you're in IT, then you know, and maybe you know other anyway, but we offer cloud-based or on-premises hosting. Now, for the implementation process, if you're going to be hosting the system yourself, that's going to require more involvement from your IT department. Whereas if you're cloud hosting the system in a private database in our partner data center, it's going to require minimal involvement from your IT, especially when we're dealing with integrated systems, which we do very often. Security and I mentioned security is very important, but security within the system, defining what people have access to and then what is confidential between users and departments is very important. And RiteTrack allows you to define role-based security to limit what people have access to and then also give them what they should be able to access and use for their role. RiteTrack offers user-defined dashboards, so when people log in for the first time in the morning, they're presented immediately with the data that is most important for them and their role in your program. And then we also have both system-based and custom notifications. So we call them notifications. I heard them called just the other day ticklers. That's a valid one too. Reminders. These can be reminders of things that are upcoming, or in RiteTrack, if something was to have occurred and has not, it can notify people that some action needs to be taken so that nothing slips through the cracks. Because when we're dealing with things slipping through the cracks in the RiteTrack system, most often those are children and families in need. The standard modules that we offer for RiteTrack on the judicial side include court, probation, facilities, both detention or treatment facilities, also a module for outpatient treatment services, and a framework for tracking police citations and investigations. And then on the social services side, particularly in tribal social services, we worked with enrollment and member management, financial services, Indian child welfare and child protective services, and employment and training and temporary assistance for needy families programs. So that's a little bit about us, what we do, but what we do with our customers is implement RiteTrack and give them a successful system that becomes a partner to their organization, streamlines their processes while still reflecting the needs of their organization. So I'm going to start with some 4 common myths about IT projects. And the first is that the vendor will do all the work without much involvement from the customer. That may be a more common assumption than you think. I'm going to talk about that and the dangers of beliefs such as that and proceeding in an implementation that way. Another common myth is that the scope will remain the same throughout the project. I'm going to talk about scope creep, and really what I'm going to talk about is how you can limit there can be an assumption that the end users will embrace the new system, and probably some will. We often have those that are really into technology, a little more sophisticated with their use of software, and they're generally very excited. When can I get into the system? Whereas others that may not be as technically proficient may have reservations, and I'm going to talk about that and how we can prepare for change and deal with the fears and understandable trepidations of your users. And also that the new system is going to be the old system, but better and faster. We need to put away the idea that we're upgrading the old system. The old system is going away. We're getting a new system and a new framework, and there's benefits to that. We're not just reskinning your old system. So let's talk about each of these in a little more detail. Vendor will do all the work. As Katie mentioned, I spent many years as a project manager and then overseeing that department. What I used to say is, while we have a dozen standard modules, one that we don't have is a magic crystal ball module that tells us what you need in your system beyond the standard functionality. For that, we need our customer to collaborate with their Handle project manager, and I'll talk about these steps or these items as I go through steps later on in a little more detail. But that's going to include providing documentation, your forms assessments, your processes, your reporting requirements, and your needs. Any documentation you can provide is going to be very useful. Your expertise in answering questions and defining how processes work, making decisions about how things are going to work and flow within the system is going to be very important. And then as we go through the implementation and get closer to going live, we are going to ask that the customer participate in testing and so that they're able to do a confident sign off and acceptance of the system before going live. So anticipate, and I'll talk more about anticipating that there's going to be resources and time required. There will be if you want to be successful. Now, and really it's all about communication, providing communication back to Handle and to your project manager. This graphic shows what happens when there is a lack of or poor communication. And I really like this graphic. I'm not going to go through all of it. Hopefully you can read it on your screens. What this is showing as a metaphor for software implementation, designing a tire swing, or rather a swing. I jumped ahead of myself a little bit. Slide number one or image number one shows how the customer explained it, which from the start maybe doesn't make sense because why would we need three planks on a swing? How the project leader understood it in graphic two is different than how the customer explained it, which is different than how the analyst designed it in three or how the programmer wrote it in four. And you can see the lack of communication and the breakdown is leading to a system that is not reflective of the needs of the customer, which is reflected down here in number 12. What the customer really needed was a simple tire swing. And all of the steps and things they went through weren't reflective of that tire swing, but through proper communication and adhering to the principles of and best practices for an implementation, we can eliminate these situations. Myth number two is that the scope will remain the same. Now, it is natural for people to, when they start implementing RiteTrack and they start to realize all of the functionality available, all of the options that are there, to think of new things that they want to do beyond the original scope of the project. It's understandable. As a matter of fact, it's encouraged. What's not encouraged is to let that affect the scope of the original project. So prepare for scope creep and prepare or plan on ways to limit it. This comes down to communication as well. We want to start with a clearly defined scope of work that's agreed upon by both Handle and the customer. And that is going to define the scope for our first phase. And that is the design documentation prepared will give us a formal document that describes what this scope is going to be. Now, for any possible scope creep, refer back to the design document. It's not a part of our original scope. We don't recommend, generally, we don't recommend including it at this time. We recommend planning it for a later phase. I'll talk about phasing projects a little bit more as we go forward. But if there is going to be a change to scope, recognize that there's going to be effect on the schedule of the project and the cost. And schedule and cost are things that are very important to customers, and go lives sometimes have to happen by a certain date in order to cut over for reporting or for training that has been scheduled. It's very often not worth it to expand the scope of the project initially. Shelve those ideas. Let's put them into another design document that goes in for phase two after the system goes live with the original scope. The third myth, users will embrace the new system. And as I said, some will, whereas others will have reservations. We encountered this bit from a Harvard research study where their conclusion was people have a reliable and tangible preference for things that have been around longer. People are used to using what's there, and so they're satisfied with it because even if it doesn't do everything perfectly, they know how to work it. What they're going to be presented with is a loss of proficiency with their old system and a new system that they don't know how to use, and there may be fears about using. People worry about breaking a system. And I always said, you can't break RiteTrack. If something breaks, it wasn't your fault. It should have been quality assured, tested out. If there's a way that you can break the system, we will fix that. There shouldn't be any way. Don't have any reservations about using it, but people do, and that's understandable. They think that it's not doing things the same way, and so that's not the right way. And so people will put up that barrier and resistance, saying it's not working in the right way because it's not the old way. Not true. It may just work a little bit differently, but maybe more effectively. One of the ways, and I'll talk more about this too, you'll notice there's a lot of overlap here, that you engage end users throughout the project. A little side story. I was a project manager for an implementation for three legal offices that provided child and family services, served child and family services cases in Los Angeles. And I worked primarily with one of the attorneys, one of the head attorneys of the three firms, and he designed the customization of the system. We worked together. He was very responsive, and we had final sign off. I went out for a week of training with dozens of users from the three offices and found out that none of them knew about the new system or the project until a week before they were to be trained, where they were informed we have a new system coming, you'll be trained on it next week, and they were never given any opportunity to provide their input or feedback. And what I ended up with were just room after room of angry trainees and angry future users, not because of the system, but because of the way the system was presented to them or not presented to them throughout the process. They didn't have a voice and they weren't happy about it. And when that happens, people are less likely to accept and embrace the system. One of the ways which we found that you can help to assuage fears and to give people some competency and proficiency in RiteTrack is to develop some security blanket functionality. Now, I'm going to talk about the fact that we're not, and I mentioned we're not reskinning your old system, but if there is a piece of functionality, a form, a process, a report, an assessment that users are very used to doing, and they're used to doing it in the old system or via paper or spreadsheet or whatever your old process was, let's develop something similar in RiteTrack and teach them how to use it in the new way now. And that can be kind of their security blanket. I knew how to do this assessment in the old system or in the old way. Oh, it's the same assessment, but now it's in RiteTrack, and now I do it in this more efficient way. So giving people apples to apples comparisons instead of just a whole new framework can give them something to hold on to, a security blanket, something tangible where they already have proficiency in the system. The new system will be the old system, but better. I waffled on whether to include this first bullet, but Tiffany, our marketing and communications director, who also reviews these and does our graphic design, didn't take it out. So yeah, we're not putting lipstick on a pig. And I'm not, and what I mean by that is we're not just reskinning the old system. If you had a 1974 Pinto that was breaking down a car, you wouldn't just get it outfitted with a new exterior while it still had the old underperforming Pinto engine in it. We're getting a whole new vehicle, a whole new system. We're also not just automating the mess that you had. We're looking to improve processes. You may have heard this term: if you automate a mess, you get an automated mess. And that isn't what we're looking to do when we're trying to affect greater efficiencies, productivity, and streamlined processes with RiteTrack. So we need to recognize that you're going to need to learn a new framework, but this is an opportunity to revise and improve processes. And one of the things to present to your end users are the benefits that the new system is going to bring to the table. Here are things that we're going to be able to do in RiteTrack that we were not able to do in our prior system or our prior processes. Things are going to be automated. It's going to make your job easier. It's going to make it easier for administration and directors to report on efforts. So you can be assured that your efforts are going to be known because they're going to be documented in the system. Now, that level of transparency can be a barrier to acceptance from users who perhaps are worried that they're not doing the right things in their job. Uh, a new software system is going to expose that. That's kind of an internal problem, but recognize that you're going to have people that have barriers because of the new transparency that is going to be affected by the system. Some of the steps that you could take internally to prepare for an implementation is going to be, and these are going to be along with probably your Handle project manager and some of them more internal. But first, if it's a large, complex project that is going to integrate multiple programs, departments, modules, or there's heavy customization, let's look at how we break the project up into more manageable phases. I think of it this way. If I was to buy a new car or truck, I want to get into that car or truck and drive it that day. I don't want to have to wait 6 months to get into my new vehicle. Now, we're not going to be driving RiteTrack the next day, but if we're able to break a project into manageable phases, that's going to allow you to go live faster with at least some functionality in your highest priority programs online while bringing the others on later. Also going to talk about some principles to choosing the right project manager and the right project team, how to prepare your staff for change, how to prepare to invest time and resources, which the overlap we'll talk about with assigning your project manager as well, involving end users from day one to help prepare for that change and to ward off any barriers that people may have to embracing the system, and then plan for training appropriately. In a phased approach, if you have a large, complicated system, identify your highest priority programs. The court and probation don't have anything and they need to get on the system right away. Our facility has an EHR system and they're going to be using that at least for some time. So their second priority, let's do the court and probation first and then expand out. Again, this gives you a shorter timelines to going live, and you're getting people into the system earlier. There's benefit to that because once people start using the system and they understand how RiteTrack works, how customization can go into the system, they can assist in making better decisions moving forward for planning for the future phases because they have experience using RiteTrack. If you're approaching your project in a phased manner, include the future phases in planning for the initial phases because they're going to be integrating. There's going to be data sharing and there's going to be confidentiality. So include them at least in the high level definition of how the system is going to work for your initial phases, and then identify a reasonable timeline that is going to require adherence by both you, the customer, and Handel to ensure that it happens. The other thing that's important about the timeline, going back a couple of slides, is limiting scope creep. So we can say, yep, we can add that, but if we do, it's going to add 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month to the go live. Is that something that we're willing to do? We usually counsel against it. Choosing the right project manager. So sometimes the project manager comes from IT, if IT is going to be involved, especially if the customer is hosting the system. Sometimes the project manager, the right project manager, is the director of a program, or a manager, or somebody who possesses some, and if not all of the ideal qualities. They should be able to and understand the big picture of the program or programs, but also be detail oriented, as we're going to be drilling down into the details of data management to and how those figure into the big picture of what the system is going to be doing and how it's going to be used by your programs. Your project manager should have the authority to make decisions. Now, this is very important because if no one has the authority to make decisions, decisions don't get made. And if decisions don't get made, then timelines slip, and then your go live is months and months and months further out because no one will make a decision on sign off on the design document or after quality assurance. Be sure your project manager has that authority and the confidence in that authority to make decisions. Also, that they have respect from the rest of the staff so that when they do make decisions, staff feels like their feedback was heard, even if it wasn't factored into the final decision. People will respect their authority to make decisions. The project manager needs to be available. There's going to be meetings, at least weekly. There's going to be time sensitive things that come up. That your project manager needs to be available to work with the Handel project manager and members of both teams so that we can keep the project on track and on timeline. One of the ways that we found, although this is sometimes hard to do, we understand that, is to minimize the workload of your project manager. Can you take their caseload down 20% or their normal workload down 20% so that they can dedicate that time to the RiteTrack implementation? If we're able to do that, the implementation is likely to go that much smoother. And your project manager should understand your operational processes, but not necessarily everyone, because we're putting together, or we're hoping you put together a project team that's going to include process experts that may be beyond your project manager. Then maybe they're more big picture, but the individual processes are going to come from experts from those programs. Bring them into the project team. It's a good idea to include a tech savvy and then tech adverse end user. So the tech savvy end user is going to be one of those that's an early adopter. They're excited about the system. They can't wait to get their hands on it and start using it. Your tech adverse end user is going to be the one that is used to the old ways. They're not looking forward to the new system. We need to cater to both of those user bases. And so getting input from both can be very important, particularly if you're hosting the system yourself. Involving IT as far as the setup on your network and servers is going to be important. If you're using RiteTrack or Handel's cloud hosting, again, the involvement from IT will likely be minimal. If there's a data conversion from a legacy system, then having somebody who's an expert in that legacy system is going to be important, as they're going to be able to help with the field mappings from the old system to RiteTrack, as well as testing to ensure that all of the data has come across appropriately from the old system, because they're experts in that. And if we're integrating with another third-party system used by your departments, then somebody who's an expert in that third-party system so that we can identify, again, field mappings for the integration, timing, and how that's going to look and work in the other system that they are an expert in. Now, knowing you may not have all of these pieces for a project team, do the best you can. That's what we ask. Preparing for change. I mentioned earlier that communication is key, and communicating clearly and accurately is very important here so that people know what to expect. If people don't know what to expect, or if they're surprised, they're less likely to be accepting. If you communicate what is going to be coming very clearly, then no one has the ability to say, I didn't know, I didn't have an opportunity to weigh in on this. When they do, be receptive of that feedback and show empathy to the fact that people are losing their old proficiencies and have worries about that. Be receptive, even if the feedback doesn't affect changes in your scope or design. At least respond to it and as to why maybe we're not going in that direction, so that people don't feel as though they weren't heard at all. Part of preparing for change and getting end users to embrace the system involves training. So training from the very start, and as you go through the implementation, training of the standard functionality initially. As new deployment releases come out, training in the new pieces of functionality that are there to be tested. And we will set up and maintain at the very start a test environment, and then maintain that once the system goes into production and goes live as well, so that people always have a place where they can go and play and test and get familiar with things without having to worry about the fact that they might break the system. They won't. Or that they may do something wrong with the data, and that's understandable. Prepare to invest time and resources. That's going to be from your project manager, from your project team, potentially IT. And what is that going to be doing? Well, providing that documentation, that to Handel that I talked about earlier, and is one of the first steps in our implementation phases, but also planning changes to your forms, documents, and reports. Are there things you've been wanting to do that you haven't done because the old system, whatever that is, software, paper, spreadsheets, your own access database, it didn't allow you to do those things. Improvements you wanted to make to your operations, now's the opportunity to do that. But we need to plan those and update those documents and redefine those processes. That's going to take time. And those are things that Handle can assist with. But while we're experts in RiteTrack and maybe kind of your field in general, we are not experts yet in your program, in your office. That's the training we need, and providing this documentation and working with Handle to define it is going to allow us to become experts in your processes and program as well. And finally, you're going to be defining a security model. So that's going to go down to the field level into what people can view, edit, or delete. And so you're going to do that for each role, each user type, each different role or position in your program may have different access, and so you're going to define that along with your project manager. It's going to take some thought and time. Involve end users from day one. So here I'm going to start referring back. See, end users will embrace the new system, not necessarily. What do we do? Well, communicate with them, which comes from C, preparing for change recommendations. This can come through demonstrations. So demonstrations are meant as training, but also to generate enthusiasm for the new system. Oh, look what it is going to do for us. I can't wait until we get it. And so ongoing demonstrations, particularly like when new functionality comes out, look, maybe it's just a demonstration to those users who are going to be affected by it. Try to generate enthusiasm, get them excited for the system. This can be done in update meetings, and it can be a good idea, even if it's informal, to have a forum for feedback. That's both initially when you're telling them about the plans for the system, and then including them along the way as we're releasing new pieces and functionality and customization. Allow them to provide feedback. It can be very valuable. And what we found, like with my experience with the law offices in Los Angeles, if we don't involve end users and allow them to provide feedback, the way the system works in a day-to-day data entry usage may be much different than the way the director or a manager envisioned it. And so to get those processes accurately, we want the end users' feedback from day one. How to prepare best for training. First of all, never skimp on training. You'll find in our contracts, we always have enough time for appropriate training for the number of users and the number of roles to be trained. That can also include follow-up training, as people sometimes need that. They may absorb a lot of it the first time, but need some follow-up to fill in the holes that they might not have gotten. Very important to train immediately before going live with your system, because people will lose their competency from training if you wait too long or if we wait at all. Our recommendation is train the week before going live, and that Monday, everyone goes live on the new system and they start using their training immediately. I've seen this situation before, and it is very inadvisable. That is to do training right before a holiday. So we're going to do training before Thanksgiving or before Christmas, and then when people come back from the holiday, we'll start using the new system. That's not a good approach at all. People forget what they've learned, and then when they come back, number one, they don't want to have to remember those things, and you're more likely to get feedback that it doesn't work because people don't know how to make it work. So train immediately before going live. Provide, and this is to Handle because we do the training, and that's we're doing train the trainer training, and that's something different. But role-based training, so we're providing training to those users just for the way they'll be using the system. They don't need to be inundated or have their understanding clouded with parts of the system they won't be viewing or using at all. We'll train to the specific role of the users, and try to allot both time and attention to trainings. What I mean by that is if you have a 6-hour training, Don't put anything else on the calendar for your staff that are going to be in that training for 6 hours. Have them put their phones down. Don't respond to things during the training. Give it your total and devoted attention. The training is going to be much more productive that way. It's something that we try to wrangle during trainings, but also comes from internally and the customer themselves, depending on the number of people to be trained and whether it's on site or online, and that depends on the size and complexity of the project as well as the number of users. We may have two trainers, one who's doing presentation and the other who's doing over the shoulder answering questions. It can be a very good idea to have the customer project manager there and available for all trainings as well, so that then when there's questions from the end users, they can help to translate those questions and concerns or needs to your Handel project manager. So let's go through the implementation phases. The first is going to be information gathering, and that is where after the project kickoff call, where our business development team or representative is going to introduce you to your project manager, and they're going to provide you with some paperwork, some uh, basically homework for you. They have some worksheets to be filled out that's going to inform them about your data management, day-to-day operational needs, processes, as well as reporting. And they're going to request from you information about your policies and procedures. If you have an intake form or forms or other forms that are completed that we may be then now doing electronically in RiteTrack, we'll need copies of those. Any assessments that you're going to want to be configured and customized in RiteTrack, documents that your program may generate, and documents and reports. Documents generally are for documentation that is going to be generated outside of RiteTrack, printed or exported to PDF and emailed and provided to your clients, children, families, or clients out of the system. Whereas reports are those that are going to be reviewed internally and are going to help you to gain insights into your data and better ideas about your efforts and the outcomes from them and what's working best. So a lot of this may be paper. If you have an existing legacy system, it's going to be a review of that, maybe screenshots, whatever your current process is. We want to understand that completely so that we know how to improve upon it and mirror and enhance it in your new RiteTrack system. We go on from information gathering and your project manager digesting all of that information so they understand what your needs are when they come to the table for joint application development meetings. You're going to review the information gathered, make sure that the project manager understands everything that you've provided. You're going to work with them to define how to configure the standard functionality. So that's going to include security across both standard and custom functionality, but things like your drop-down list, care plans, treatment plans, charge lists, case types, those are all standard functionality that need to be configured. And then for those additions to the system, you're going to define customization. And we're going to do that in a very detailed way, down to field and layout of how it's going to look on the screen, and then the design documentation, which is our next step, is going to reflect that. If there's going to be a data conversion, field mapping is going to be very important. Where is the data from the old system going to live now in RiteTrack, and where will users be able to find that? And again, I mentioned already, and I won't belabor the security model, but that's something you'll go over in joint application development as well. Design documentation takes all of those decisions that you made with your project manager and puts it into a single document that provides table layouts, graphical illustrations of what screens and reports are going to look like, definition of security. All of basically the blueprints for your system are going to be prepared by your project manager and then provided to you to review. Now, they may not have gotten it all right the first time, and so that's why you're reviewing. There may be multiple iterations of the design document before it is complete and accurate, and then the customer provides sign-off. Once sign-off and approval of the design documentation is obtained, We'll go into deployment and quality assurance. Now, Tiffany, who does the graphics for me and makes the presentations look good, found this picture. This is not reflective of our development, deployment, or quality assurance. A picture of me and a friend, former coworker, and a former architect of RiteTrack, Jess. Us working at some, I'm going to call this sarcastically, a server suite at a customer implementation and getting it installed. This is not reflective of what our office looks like. Thanks, Tiffany. I didn't have time to remove this, a little embarrassing. But what is going to happen during deployment and quality assurance is Handel's going to be configuring the standard functionality, developing custom functionality. While this goes on, there's going to be releases of the new pieces, and then in your weekly or perhaps more often meetings, you'll have the opportunity to review these new releases. They'll be in the test environment. Users can go in and review that, test, provide quality assurance. We also do extensive quality assurance testing in-house, but what we find is there could be edge cases, a way of using the system that we never thought of, but a user did. And so we want them to be testing those edge cases so we ensure that the system can accommodate any type of usage. And then if there's the data conversion, side-by-side operations testing. Once there is an iteration of the conversion, and there may be multiple iterations of that when we take and import the data from your old system into RiteTrack. Then we'll do testing side by side, looking at the old system and RiteTrack and the records in the old and new to make sure that they align. System documentation and training kind of happens throughout the deployment, but that design document that you reviewed and approved that was the blueprint for your system will now be turned into a training manual. So less technical and more geared toward end users. With this happening, the final system sign-off is going to occur. We're going to do, depending on the size and scope of the project, online or on-site role-based training, which I talked about earlier, and then planning for or being prepared to do follow-up training as well. Often a good idea. We're going to come on site, we're going to do training for 3 days, and then the next week, or perhaps the week after, we're going to do a follow-up session of a couple hours with trainees of different groups to answer any questions that they have, to make sure that they are feeling competent in the system and address any needs or issues that they are having. One thing I didn't note in here, but we do, I don't know if I'd say often, 50% of the time perhaps, and that is video training. So again, depending on size and scope of the system and just the needs and requirements of the customer and how they want to have that documentation, then we can also do video-based training. So we've gone through the implementation. We've signed off on the blueprints. We've deployed all of the custom functionality. Everyone has tested, done quality assurance. We've went through iterations of releases, and we are finally ready to go live. I say finally, but because we're doing this in manageable phases, probably a couple months in, and we're looking at going live with our first phase. What happens then? Well, if there's a data conversion, we're going to do that final data conversion. Again, this is something that we like to break over a weekend. People get trained on the week up until Friday. On Friday, we start the data conversion, run that over the weekend. And on Monday, people come into a fresh RiteTrack system with the final data imported. We will officially end the use of the legacy system unless you have a data conversion and we're doing side-by-side operations for some time, but when we should have a timeline for the ending use of that legacy system as well. RiteTrack will be put into a production environment. Now, we had a test environment, beta, if you will, previously. We are going to be creating a new clean production environment that will be devoid of data or will only have that that's been imported from the final data import. But we will still maintain and support that test or training system so people have the opportunity to go into there and remind themselves of how to do things or try new things as well. Or as new development is released, it will first go into the training system for review before it's pushed out to the live or production system. And hindsight, I probably should have had a separate slide for support, but I can just talk about what support entails. First of all, I always think of a project going live kind of like and Handel at the time and our support team being like a hockey goalie. So they're ready, they're on the ice, they've got their stick, and they're ready for the pucks to start flying in. And those pucks are people calling and emailing and saying, I don't know how to do this, I forgot how to do this, this isn't working the way I expected. We expect that immediately upon your going live because there's going to be things people forgot. There's going to be tweaks that are going to be need to be made to the system. Invariably, this always happens. What we are concerned about is if you go live and we don't hear from you, because that means people aren't using the system and they aren't coming up with questions and they aren't coming up with feedback. So we expect and anticipate a little spike in your support when you first go live. And then as people become confident in the system, maybe we do some follow up trainings and the system becomes more and more stable and people's usage of it day to day does as well. Then there's going to be less and less support required. But when support is required, our support services are exceptional. You will have access to your project manager who is an expert in your system, but he or she has a team behind them. And then we have people on a support team as well, again, all internal. Our guaranteed support time is 1 hour response, but it's very rare that you won't get somebody within minutes or immediately upon a phone or email request. Our support is unlimited. It's not limited by an amount of incidents or hours per month. Our philosophy is RiteTrack should work correctly without error, and users should be appropriately trained on how to use the system. And if either of those situations are not in effect, then we need to work uh, to remedy those things. And so Handle remains beside you and behind you as a partner as you go forward with your usage of the system. And then as your system grows and changes, 6 months from going live, you may have identified a whole other phase of work that you want done. Working with your project managers to develop change orders to do that, whether that's 6 months or 6 years from now, RiteTrack can continue to grow and evolve to meet your needs so we don't end up a legacy system that needs to be replaced because it's outworn its functionality and usefulness. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. Again, I hope you found it informative. Katie is going to take us home and wrap this up. Let us know if you had any questions. If you guys want more information, I'd be happy to talk to you. Here's my contact information as well as just the info at Handle IT for information requests. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your attention today.
All right, great, Casey. We do have a couple of questions today. The first one is kind of a set of questions. They are curious about what can I anticipate as a timeline when I pursue a new case management system? And then in specific, how long does an implementation usually take?
Sure. Great questions. And the first answer is the one you don't want, and of course, they can vary. That being said, because they can vary, what we look to do and advise is breaking your project up into manageable phases that would last 2 to 4 months each. You're going to have a week or weeks of meetings. There's going to be weeks of development. You're going to be looking at a couple of months minimum, probably. But if you have a very large and complex project that's going to be 9 months of work, we're going to recommend let's do this part or these parts of it first and get you live on that in the next 3 to 4 months. And then we'll add the other pieces in. So you're not waiting 9 months or a year to get into your system. So there is no standard, but what there is how we can define the scope to enable you to be live in a matter of a couple of months rather than looking at a year of waiting and work. Now, that being said, this does rely heavily on people adhering to the timeline, and that includes customers doing their responsibilities within that timeline. But so long as everybody follows the processes and best practices that we put forward in today's presentation and in the what to expect when implementing RiteTrack document that we provide when we start an implementation with a new customer, then you will be able to keep it and get you live in a couple of months rather than having to delay it any further.
Okay, great. And then our next question here is curious about how Handle IT chooses a project manager on their side for implementation. They say, I am a juvenile court, and if I were to implement RiteTrack, would I get a project manager who has experience with implementing your system in other juvenile courts?
That's precisely how we look at assigning project managers, is based on their uh, level of comfort with similar systems. So if we're looking at a juvenile court, then project manager who has experience with multiple other juvenile courts, maybe has some other juvenile courts under their belt, and so that they are currently supporting. The benefit of that is that the project manager then already knows how to speak your language, if you will, and they recognize the needs and requirements you have because they may be similar to the other courts or programs that they've worked with. So whenever possible, based upon their their resource and availability, we do assign people based upon their expertise with programs like that because we know it's going to um, uh, lead to better probability of success because they've been there before, and that's one of the things that's important to recognize, and I think is a benefit of Handel's project managers and their expertise is, in your work life, you may go through a handful, that would probably be a lot, of different software implementations over the years within your work environments. We do it every day. Your project manager does it every day. They're experts in the process. And so, uh, us bringing that experience to the table is huge when it comes to success of an implementation. And we've been very successful in our efforts of doing that. At the same time of making sure that our project managers are cross-trained so that they're not too specialized and aren't able to accommodate the needs of different programs. So kind of a hard one to get your hands on, but as much as possible, yeah, we assign PMs based upon their prior experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Casey. I think that wraps it up on the question end. But once again, you always provide so many great insights, and you've made it clear to see how important the implementation process is and how Handle has developed theirs to make it seamless for everyone involved. And then, as Casey mentioned, his contact information is here on the screen, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you all again for attending today's session. As we close it out, I just want to remind you all that there will be a short survey that pops up at the closing of the webinar, and we would love to hear your feedback. I hope that everyone has enjoyed today's session and that you will return for our upcoming webinars, so keep an eye out in your inboxes and on our website for those. I believe that is all from me, so thanks again, everyone, and have a great week.
Thanks. Take care.